What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Microcast. I'm TJ David here with Zoe Rome.
I'm Coach Zoe Rome.
Yes, you are.
Stoked to be back. I have quite a streak going.
I know. What is this, 3 in a row?
3 in a row, baby.
Good work. Good work. We're talking about Western states and downhill running.
I feel like we're always talking about Western states.
I know.
It's a fun thing to talk about.
It's 8 weeks away.
Yeah, 8 weeks out, but who's counting?
Scary close.
Scary close.
Scary close.
We're also talking about, looks like we have some really fun nutritional hot or nots.
Yep.
And we're also really going to be breaking down, should athletes train by heart rate or RPE, rate of perceived exertion. And I think this is a really juicy topic. And honestly, this is one of the biggest questions that when I'm talking with newer athletes, this is one of the biggest unknowns they have. Should I train by heart rate or should I train by RPE? So I can't wait to dissect that with you as we get into the episode.
Nice. Let's start out with some hot or not topics.
All right, give it to me.
Morton sodium bicarb.
Man,
Do you know what this is?
I do. This is the weird gel soup that Killian Jornet ate during UTMB.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's like $30 a serving. I did some research on this earlier. It's extremely expensive. It comes in its own little like container pod, and you have to like mix it. So like I think the idea is at an ultra race, you see like your crew would mix it for you. So I want to zoom out and say that sodium bicarbonate is shown in evidence to help people better shuttle lactate. However, it's always sort of been a bit of a bugaboo in the scientific or in the endurance community. How do you get sodium bicarbonate into your system? There are topical ways you can put it on with like the PR lotion kind of thing. Runners used to this is something people have been using sodium bicarb in endurance sports for decades. The challenge is that introducing it into your stomach essentially creates like a science fair volcano. You know, when you add baking soda and vinegar into a volcano, boom, your stomach is essentially vinegar, and the sodium bicarb creates a little bit of an explosion that is not conducive to endurance performance. So the idea of the Morton sodium bicarb is based in science. I am a little wary of people using it at ultra endurance events because the output levels that most people are reaching, it's not that important for you to increase your lactate shuttling. So this isn't really something I would recommend for most people running ultras. I think this is something that if you were trying to like PR a 10K, potentially, depending on your fitness levels, this could be beneficial, but I think this comes back to sort of the overall microcosm philosophy that the best thing to focus on is just improving your fitness, right? Because you can improve how your body shuttles lactate through this fancy thing that we call training. And you can do that every single day without spending, hundreds of dollars on expensive cookie making materials. Yeah, what's your take, Coach TJ?
I'm cold on this particular hack. I think one, it's pretty tough on the stomach.
Have you tried it? Have you eaten it?
I have. I tried it over the winter before a big treadmill workout, and I thought it made my performance worse.
Oh.
I thought it really impacted my ability to run efficiently in the heat.
Huh. How so?
I noticed that just in particular, like my sweat rate was a lot higher after taking this than normal. And I felt like it was much more difficult for me to like uptake and absorb sodium during the run. So I got really, really dehydrated on the run that I used that on, and I never used it again. It also it did affect my stomach a little bit.
It looks like something from like an Alien versus Predator movie. Like it looks like something that would be squirted out of an alien.
It's just, I think it's,
Was it really gross?
No. It was kind of like eating a gel, but with little pellets that you have to swallow, and you don't.
Sounds pretty gross. It looks like the stuff I wash my face with.
Yeah, it's just, I think I've used like the PR lotion a lot. I've kind of had mixed opinions on it. I feel like if you're not, so the point isn't to improve lactate shuttling. I think the point is to the sodium. I think the point really is to help to diminish the lactate that you actually have in your blood. So it's not to improve the shuttling, it's to like buffer against
Right,
the amount
right,
of
right. You're
lactate
right.
in the blood.
It's a lactate buffer.
So I don't know, if you use that, does that actually impact your ability to become better at shuttling and to adapt?
Right. Well, I did look into this, and there wasn't any research done that showed that the topical application of sodium bicarbonate improved buffering.
Right.
So,
yeah,
again, like, it could work. We just have zero evidence that it does. Also, I think, like, a big lesson from this is just because Killian Jornet does something doesn't mean it's right. Because, again, I think there's even a big question of, like, the majority of the evidence points to, consuming sodium bicarbonate as being the most productive at higher outputs for short amounts of time. Running UTMB is not that, especially for most people.
Well, for those guys, they are running that hard.
Right. But like the majority of athletes are not.
Right.
And again, it's still like Killian Jornet isn't going 10K pace around Mont Blanc. Yes, he's going pretty hard, and yes, he's probably able to get a lot closer to his absolute lactate threshold when he's running 106 miles. But even so, I think that looking at the research that exists, there's a big question mark as to why Killian is doing this while running UTMB. And I think the best answer to that is that he's sponsored by Morton.
Yeah, that could be. I think he also likes to, experiment with himself, and he is chasing kind of those
marginal gains.
Really marginal gains.
There is not a single athlete that I work with for whom I would recommend this intervention.
No, I don't recommend it for anyone I know either. And I know a lot of good athletes.
Yeah, you don't think that the difference between most of our friends like reaching their PRs and not is sodium soup?
No, I think it's a complete waste of money.
Yeah, agreed.
At this point.
And again, it just looks so gross to me. Ugh.
All right, what about Beet supplements, especially before a race or a big workout or a long run?
So there is some evidence that what is the thing in Beets? Like what nitrite? What is it?
Nitrates?
Nitrates can improve performance.
I'm not sure.
But you can also just get that from a beet.
You could just drink beet juice.
You could just drink beet juice. Again, this is something that, like, the gains are going to be so marginal. This is not something I, like, specifically recommend athletes doing. I'm happy to categorize this under, like, more research is needed, could be cool if true, but the gains are just going to be so marginal that, like, if you like beets, yeah, eat beets. Beets taste good. I think they're really fun. It does always scare me when I eat beets, and then I forget that I eat beets, and then I think I'm dying of rhabdomyolysis because my pee is all fucked up. So word to the wise, but I think beet supplements I'm even less likely to recommend over just beets because supplements aren't regulated and it's just like really hard to say what's actually in it, how much are you really getting. Just a lot more question marks and variables introduced there when you are trying to get the benefits from a supplement.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've definitely like had beet juice before races and things like that because it does.
But that's different than a supplement, right? Or would you categorize beet juice as a?
I mean, that feels like a hack. It feels like a supplement just in the form of a glass bottle with fluid inside. You're using that to hopefully increase your performance the next day in a meaningful way with, beet juice. It's supposed to help improve your like your vascular system
and like the creation of new red blood cells as well.
It's supposed to help improve blood volume and circulation, things like that. I mean, I don't really know how much hard data, and I honestly, to be completely fair, I spent zero time researching this because I just don't.
You're going off vibes.
Well, I don't think it's something that's meaningful for athletes to think about.
Yeah, the research that I did suggested like more, again, like we need to do additional specific research. Like there was not a study that showed like that correlated beet consumption with ultramarathon performance. There were some that like really small scale sample studies that showed that drinking beet juice was helpful in introducing things that could be like there was not a study that directly showed improved performance from drinking beets.
Well, here's the hot take. What's going to improve your performance is doing
like
your training.
20 other things.
No, it's three things. It's running easy for years, doing some speed work, and repeating that process.
Well, I'm thinking
time
more
and time
specifically,
again.
like what's an intervention that you can do the week before a race to improve performance, and
You
that
could
would
rest.
be focusing on sleep, focusing on stress management, focusing on mental preparation. There's a lot of other things that are going to have less marginal gains than drinking beet juice, and will do less weird stuff to your urine.
Right, and totally. It's same with trying to, regulate your, the pH level of your blood during performance with like sodium bicarb. It's just like, what, you know what? I'm not going to spend much time looking at these things because really, how did you train? How was the training block? How is your training history? What's your foundation like as an athlete over years? We should be looking at much bigger percentages for 99.9% of all athletes.
I know. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, have we ever had something on Hot or Not that's like a more effective intervention than consistency and like good recovery?
No.
Like, no.
It's all just like hacky stuff.
Yeah.
Silver bullet. And I'm like, that kind of just bugs me because we all kind of want that silver bullet, but
right, like I would love to tell my athletes, you know what, don't worry about missing your training, you can just chug some beet juice, send me the money for coaching, and we'll call it good.
Right.
But that's not how it works, and thankfully not, because job security for us.
Totally. So although like I appreciate these prompts and being asked about these things.
I'm gonna get like a sound effect for when we do get, and these were all athlete submitted, so we are so grateful for the folks in our community, people that we coach, people that we will coach in the future. Send us your hot or nots, and someday we'll have a celebration if we ever find something and do the research on it, and it seems like an effective intervention.
Right? Like, here's a good hot or not. Body glide.
Burr, burr, burr.
Hot.
Effective.
How about caffeine, though? I feel like this is a little less hacky.
This is less hacky. This is actually one of the few things that is shown to have performance benefits. Yep. I think that every athlete should have a caffeine strategy for their for race day. The caveat is that, sort of like how you metabolize caffeine and how impacted your GI system is by caffeine intake. That's going to be really individually variable. But caffeine is it's a legal performance enhancer, and you should be using it strategically. You don't want to take in too much because that'll fuck your GI system right up. You do want to think about taking in some if you can handle it. Another thing that we get asked about a lot that's just not a thing is the caffeine taper. That's not shown in the majority of research to be effective. So the idea is that you curtail caffeine use in order to reduce or to increase your sensitivity. So like 2 weeks before an event, you'll stop drinking coffee, stop taking caffeine, so that way when you do your event, it's more impactful. The evidence shows that it just really doesn't work that well.
Yeah, I agree. I also think like the negative side effects of reducing caffeine, athletes don't really realize how much that affects
I would not be a person.
Yeah, like
can you imagine
day-to-day.
me without caffeine?
No. I've never seen you not on caffeine.
No. And like when I race, I take in probably enough caffeine to kill a whale.
Like every gel that you take in is caffeinated.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Much.
I am juicing.
I'm trying to get to work on my caffeine game because I historically never do caffeine during races ever. Like I never have.
Wild.
And the reason for that is because like early on I used to try maybe like 5 years ago, and it kind of made my stomach a little weird because I'm pretty fast metabolizer. Like I can just like
I'm a slow metabolizer.
I can get floored by like caffeine.
Yeah, I need like a constant IV drip just throughout my daily life to keep things even keel.
So I tried something new.
Okay.
At Lake Sonoma 50.
What'd you do?
I used the Salt Stick 30 milligram, 30 milligram caffeine, 190 milligram sodium salt pills. And I took like 30 milligrams, I think every hour, the last 3 hours of the race.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a meaningful energy boost.
Yeah.
But I also didn't have an energy dip. And so I felt like that was a good win. I felt like, my stomach tolerated that well. So I'm going to keep building off of that.
So I've probably taken in 30 milligrams of caffeine since we started recording. But I would say maybe consider like in training experimenting with doing slightly more. You can even alternate every other hour or something. But 30 milligrams just isn't a
It's
ton.
not that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true. But like I'm starting slow and
you're a little
building up
caffeine baby.
because I don't need that much. Like
Yeah.
a espresso, double espresso, and I'm like, I can hardly think sometimes. Like it gets to my head so much.
Right. I think one shot of espresso has about 70 milligrams. So two is like maybe 140.
Yeah.
A cup of coffee is probably going to be about 140, maybe 170, depending on the size of the cup of coffee.
Okay. All right. I was kind of operating under a cup of coffee is 100.
I think it's more.
More?
Yeah. Coffee has more caffeine than espresso per serving. So like 8 ounces, a cup of coffee has more caffeine than a shot of espresso.
Yeah. I'm going to try taking two of those pills on my long run this weekend, see how it goes.
Yeah.
2 at a time.
Nice.
Get up to that single shot of espresso.
Let's fucking go.
Dose. How about ketones? Hot or not?
Exogenous ketones?
Yes.
So it really depends on the quality of the ketone. If you want to deep dive into this, Coach Kylie has done a lot of really great writing for Outside on this. There is a patent for the exogenous ketone that was developed in collaboration with the U.S. military. The two guys that developed that patent split off and created rival companies.
Oh, is that Delta G and IQ? Are
Yes.
they the rivals?
That's correct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
and Delta G, which is the hashtag no free ads, hashtag not sponsored, hashtag more research is needed.
Hashtag I would like to be sponsored by Delta G if you're listening.
TJ's interested. So there is some increasing really interesting. If you look at the recipes for Delta G versus Ketone IQ, Delta G is significantly more concentrated, and what I've learned from Kylie is that it's the only concentration that in the evidence is shown to have like measurable results. Ketone IQ, you'll notice it comes in much bigger bottles and is also less expensive. That is because it is a lot more diluted because of the patent ownership.
You have to take about a double dose
to get the amount of ketone esters that you need to actually force your body into ketosis.
A double dose of the ketone IQ is basically the same as a single dose of the Delta G.
Right. So, this is like still very much the Wild West, but there is some really interesting evidence that's showing that probably the best use of exogenous ketones, so something that you drink that forces your body into ketosis, wherein it becomes less dependent on glucose for energy and is better able to utilize fat for energy. This was, again, originally developed for the U.S. military as a way of helping like pilots flying overnight missions staying more cognitively cognitively engaged. So there's not a lot of evidence that would lead us to recommend using exogenous ketones in competition, but there is a lot of evidence coming out that shows that it might improve recovery because it increases like essentially the amount of energy that your body can call on in order to refuel, because it like gives you more than one sort of fuel source. So one of the reasons that exogenous ketones is preferable to something like the ketone diet, there was a study that showed that even people who were following very restrictive keto diets, if you eat just like even a small amount of carbohydrates, it switches your body back into glucose. So it's very hard to restrict to the point where you actually force your body into ketosis. It's very hard to measure if your body is actually in ketosis. And our bodies do, again, like especially female athlete bodies thrive on carbohydrate for those higher output energy systems. So we really never recommend that athletes adopt a keto diet or a low carb, high fat diet because it's so restrictive as to limit your food sources, limit carbohydrate intake. And again, like one study I saw, 70% of people who thought they were in ketosis and were following very restrictive diets, when they actually like peed to test the level of ketones, they weren't actually in ketosis. So they were following this really insane restrictive diet for like absolutely no reason.
It's risky.
But if you take in exogenous ketones, it forces your body into that state. It can improve things like sleep, recovery, and cognitive function.
And there's also been some research to suggest that it can improve your ability to adapt to
Correct.
overtraining stimulus.
Yes, it can force people out of overtraining. Another really fascinating sort of like twist in this is that all of the studies that I've looked at have like sort of had the note that one reason that it might better help people recover is that it stimulates appetite that's suppressed after intense exercise. So typically taking in exogenous ketones also makes you hungrier, also makes you eat more. And it was actually really hard in a lot of the studies to tell, like, well, is it actually the ketones that's helping people recover better? Or is it just because they're fueling more after the workout, which I think is just, I mean, there are actually some, studies that have been able to eliminate that variable, but I point out that early sort of hinge in the research because I think it shows the absolute importance of eating enough for recovery. There is no hack, nothing on earth that is going to be as beneficial for you in your training as making sure that you're fueling sufficiently.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. And I think that, when athletes are really in peak training, their systems are flooded with cortisol. It does suppress appetite
and ghrelin.
Yeah, so taking in ketones maybe after your workout day and your long run day could potentially not only help you adapt better to the workload. We're not sure on the mechanisms. Is it the ketones themselves, or is it that ketones trigger that feeling of needing to eat more? Allowing you to get better sleep, the two things that really we know for sure help with recovery, fueling and sleep. So, I think that this is definitely pretty hot. I'm a ketone user.
We both use it in our training.
Yeah.
I take it after workouts and after long runs.
And I use it in my racing too.
Yeah. In race?
I didn't at Lake Sonoma, but
you did
all my races last year, I took in ketones. I find that there was a study done on cognition for athletes late in races. The athletes who were taking in ketones reported that they felt more alert later in longer ultras. And so for that reason...
Caffeine can do that too, though.
Totally. But again, maybe...
That's right. Well, actually, our brain does better use... So essentially, being in ketosis allows our body to draw on a fuel source that is best used by our brains, which consume a shit ton of energy. Especially my brain. Jesus Christ, my brain probably needs more energy than the average brain. It's doing a lot. There's a lot going on up there.
Yeah, so check it out. This stuff is wicked expensive.
It's super expensive, and this is something I would really only recommend for athletes who are already optimizing everything else, like limiting alcohol consumption, maximizing sleep, completing the training consistently, and managing stress to the best of their ability. Like, if you're not training consistently, you're not eating well, you're not trying to sleep well, you're not getting out the door, ketones are not going to be helpful for you.
Yeah, I'd probably go as far as to say if you don't have 2 or 3 years minimum of really consistent, focused training under your belt, you're just probably too early on in the process.
Yeah,
to even,
I feel like I'm
from
probably, this is not an intervention I would recommend for anyone other than pretty serious competitive athletes.
Yeah.
Most of your time and energy and financial resources would be best directed to optimizing other things first.
Right? I'm hot on this for myself, but I'm very hesitant to recommend this to any athletes.
That's
currently.
How I feel as well.
All right, let's get into our race swap.
Partner race swap.
What's going on with your training? How's your motivation and consistency going?
Man, this week was tough. It's so the trails are really just barely starting to open up where we are, and the weather has been absolute shit every single weekend. So I've just been running the roads and continuing to build speed and economy going into my next sort of trail block. Sort of just allowing myself to reflect on the fact that the best training is the training that happens, and to not stress out about optimizing things, and driving to the desert or, trying to run trails that aren't ready to be run.
Yeah. I feel God, the weekend,
just every
weather,
single weekend here has been absolute crap.
Holy crap.
Shout out to our Colorado athletes for being very mentally tough.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, that can really put a dampener on motivation and consistency, but I like how you refocusing on, keeping your speed up. You're not really in that 12-week period out from Leadville yet where you need to be hyper focused on race specific adaptation. So you might as well keep building that stuff
And
that
also,
supports
like,
that.
I can't, like, I cannot get up to altitude, right? So it's sort of like sometimes I see athletes stress themselves out about stuff that they, like, don't have control over. I can't control when the snow melts. I can't control what the weather is like on the weekends. I can't control if the trails are closed because of mud. But I can focus on what I can control. And I mean, it was tough that, like, I had to switch my long run around this weekend. I ended up reducing my Saturday run to just like barely over an hour. And I was feeling kind of bad about myself, but I had two separate athletes text me and be like, dude, the weather is really shitty where I am. I think I'm just going to rest today. And I was like, sister, right there with you. So just know that, like, we're all in the same boat, and it's never worth it to beat yourself up over something that you cannot control.
I totally agree with that perspective. I think that's really hard for athletes to get to that space. It shows a lot of maturity in your athletic journey that you're getting there because, like what you said, like, you can't control it.
Yeah.
So why waste valuable mental energy getting frustrated by it or upset or getting thrown, off your normal routine, just being like, hey, you know what? Like, it's freaking raining out. Like,
Yeah.
it is what it is. Like, I
is
can't
what it
run
is.
on the trails today, but I can still run. I can still do a little bit. I can still do the best that I possibly can, and that's good enough.
Yeah. So you're moving up on the wait list for Western States. Where are you at now? When was the last time you checked?
I checked yesterday.
Where are you?
I'm 8th.
You're 8th. So only
Yeah.
8 more people?
7 more people.
7 more people.
Yeah.
Wow. How are you feeling?
Good.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little, I gotta be honest, I feel great.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
But I do feel like, okay, we're 8 weeks out from the race. I've like made the mental shift last week. Last week was a big week, 12 hours of running plus at least 2 hours of training with strength
Right.
and other stuff that I do to just keep all the things in check so I can actually go out there and run the 12 hours. I made the mental flip last week. Like, the full focus is on the race at this point. Everything else is kind of like prioritized behind that now. Like, the run is first, the training is first, the recovery is first. Like, I just can't skimp on like the rolling and the strength work, and all the little things that hold it together. This is like the time.
Yeah.
This is the time.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, 8 weeks. I can't believe it.
Western States obviously has a ton of downhill running. The trails are just starting to open up here. I'm curious how you're preparing for 100 miles of net downhill racing. What are you doing? Are you doing strength? How are you approaching that in your training?
Oh,
Because you love downhill running.
I love downhill running.
Yeah.
But it can still get you because it's
Right.
100 miles. What am I doing? I'm trying to get vert on all my runs.
What does
I'm
that look
trying
like
to
for
do
you?
all my runs on trails.
Uh-huh.
Kind of like the minimum standard for a 10-mile run or like an 80-minute effort is going to be at least 1,000 feet. So runnable vert.
Right.
We're not talking about vert where I have to hike because there's really no hiking on the Western States course from what I've heard from, runners who have run strong times there.
For an elite man.
Yeah, like the key
there's
is
not a lot of walking.
Yeah, the key is to really run as much at the up. So practicing that, and then running the downhills with intention. Even over the weekend, Saturday was just a total shit show for weather. But I ran road. I got I ran up for 7-8 miles, and then I ran straight downhill for 7-8 miles.
Yeah.
And it's not like super steep. It was probably only, I think, 2,000 feet of vert for the run. But just having that intention and continuing to like push the quads, I think, is really important. I did the same thing on Sunday, but it was a little bit better. I was on dirt road.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit more climbing, a little more steep. But still, I mean, we're so limited by terrain right now. It just is what it is. So there's no reason to get stressed about it. You do what you can. Trying to run those downs hard.
Right.
I think.
How do you think about that?
I think about running hard. I'm like, I should feel sore.
Yeah. You like send it
Yeah,
on the downs.
definitely.
Very intentionally.
Definitely.
Increase your effort on the downhills. Not using it like free speed.
And well, the thing about it is, why not? As long as your legs feel good, you have no niggles, there's really no reason not to push the downhill for
Right.
any athlete out there
No,
because
I'm just
there's
trying
no
to
aerobic benefit.
explore how you think about it so that other athletes who want to work on increasing their downhill speed and efficiency can understand sort of like what mental cues and what specific approach you're using and see if that resonates for them.
I try to go faster than I would on the race day itself
Yeah.
on those downs, significantly faster, like at
Yeah.
least a minute a mile faster. And I try to build that downhill speed up over the course of several runs. So like over the weekend, I was getting in like 6:40 pace on the downs. That's a pretty comfortable race pace for me. Like I really need to get more. I need to be closer to probably 6 minute miles on the smooth fast downhills, maybe even in the 5:40 pace area, like really pushing. Because without it, like I've noticed for myself, like running 6:30, 6:40 on the downhill in a race on that kind of terrain, I'm going to be running those paces all the time. So I really need to actually prepare my quads for what feels more difficult to sustain long term. Yeah. So it's really about like if you're going to be doing like a couple 2-hour runs over the weekend, like how much of that can you actually push beyond your current capability to help force the adaptations.
I love that.
Yeah.
You've also been building your volume through incorporating doubles. So on key days, you incorporate a second easy run at the end of the day that's a second easy run.
Yeah, the doubles.
What does that look like in your training? What do you think athletes can learn from your approach to doubles?
Well, that's a good question. I think
your approach is different, by the way. Like,
why?
What
do you think?
So you and I approach doubles differently.
Okay. Yes, I typically try to do at least a 40-minute double.
Yeah.
I have to admit though, like lately, just in the build up for Lake Sonoma, I was actually really struggling to meet my standard on that. I was doing a lot more 30-minute doubles. I like to run these purely by time. 40 minutes is really kind of like the standard double that you see in elite marathon runners. That's like their second workout is at least 40 minutes. That's what I feel like for me I need to do to feel like I'm getting any aerobic benefit from being out there. So that's what I'm pushing for right now. But I'll tell you, last week, still coming off of Sonoma, and it was a pretty busy work week. I was just feeling kind of like, okay, anything is good here.
Yeah.
And these aren't going to feel good. And don't worry about that.
How do you assess when a double is productive, and how do you guide athletes on knowing when they're ready for doubles and when it's productive for them?
I think this kind of goes
Sorry, those are two totally different questions.
Well, I think like for most athletes, doubles just aren't going to be productive.
Right.
The run double especially, you really need to be at a certain level.
It's an advanced athlete move.
Yeah, and there are ways to, start incorporating that in maybe uphill treadmill hiking or cross training in the afternoon 1 or 2 times a week, probably more like once for most people. But just getting used to that extra time spent training rather than recovering. That's the biggest difference. And you have to kind of like weigh the cost benefit of that. Like, if I've worked a full day and it's 4:00 and I know myself, and it's just like, how much am I forcing myself to get out that door? How tired, how little patience do I have left? Like I look at my battery kind of and make a judgment. And if my battery is like, I don't know. I'm like, again, this is a pretty high standard that I have for myself because I know I need to keep my volume up before a 100-miler. And it makes a big difference if you can be getting into that 12+ hour training weeks when that makes a huge difference. That's looking like 85 miles or more. My peak weeks for this race should be approaching 100 miles a week. So, I still have hours to put into my training, and probably my peak week should be at 15 to 17 hours. How do I get that a little safer? It's adding the double, but at the same time,
of like pure easy aerobic volume.
Very, very easy running.
But on hard days, so the stress is concentrated.
That's true. And on very easy terrain, and I just, for me, I'm like, oh man, like I don't normally feel great on a lot of these. Sometimes I do. It's nice, but If I don't feel good, you know, it's about kind of restructuring thoughts around that. Like, this is how it's going to feel at mile 80. You need to practice running like this. This is what, you know, you need to get this extra volume in. But for any athlete who's thinking about this, it's about knowing yourself.
Right.
You know, what is going to be productive for you and what isn't. You know, I need to be in that overreaching area right now, which is why the training is taking the
Functional
priority.
overreach.
Correct. Like, you know, in order to get the adaptations I need to really perform well, I have to get outside of my comfort zone basically every single day for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, that's the name of the game right now. That's how we're going to get to that start line being ready to go the distance.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy doubles because mine are usually about 35 minutes. Like my normal loop is like 4.5 miles, takes me 35 minutes, going easy. I like it because I get to bring Bowie and get to build Bowie's volume, whether she likes it or not. And also because you know, I'm training at a level where I just don't do that many runs that are like less than 40 minutes. You know, even on Friday, my short day, I'm running 8 miles. So it just feels like such a it's so pleasurable to run for 35 minutes. Dylan Bowman had an incredible tweet that resonated with me deeply a few years ago where it was just like 45 minutes is the perfect time for a run. Changed my mind. And I'm like, yeah, 45 minutes of running just like always feels fucking good.
See, I disagree with you on that. Like,
that's a fun amount of time to run. You know, you
yes,
can't not enjoy 45 minutes of running.
I can, because I feel like generally at that point of most days, I'm completely tapped out. Like, there's nothing left in the tank to enjoy it.
The running, it helps me like not just be on my computer till like 9 p.m. You know, because like otherwise I would just be working. So it gives me something, like it helps me shift away from work and just go outside and have fun and play with my dog and listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm really into doubles.
That feels healthier than what I'm currently doing.
Yeah. Like it feels like, I feel like I do acknowledge, like obviously whenever I'm doing doubles, I definitely fuel extra. I do structure and extra recovery. But that to me feels like, again, like it just feels very pleasurable to have such an easy run where there's no intensity structured in. It just feels so nice. And the only goal is for me to like really keep it easy and really focus on making my body feel good in the process and like resting my brain a little bit.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I don't have any double dip in workouts right now like I did over the winter where I was
you were doing double threshold.
doing a workout in the morning and a workout in the afternoon. Again, working
hard.
all day. This is not great for my mental
it's like
health.
an Oreo of pain.
I'm just like, everything's going to set me off.
Yeah.
Watch out.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll continue to do the partner race swap and coach each other as we get near our goal events this summer. But let's get into the big sort of chunky part of this podcast discussion, and that is when should athletes train by heart rate or RPE? So, TJ, I wanted to ask, do you personally use a heart rate monitor?
No.
Do you recommend typically your athletes use a heart rate monitor?
No.
Great. Episode over. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe.
I wish. And also, we've done this podcast before, so this could be review for people. I hate this conversation because it feels so, to me, it feels just like so freaking obvious. But I'm just like, you know what? Let's get into it because for a lot of newer athletes, that question of like heart rate versus RPE, what are the pros and cons? Why are we, leaning towards more RPE? I think it's gonna better the community of runners if we keep putting this information out there, because it's gonna increase the number one thing that I think this does, it increases people's relationship with themselves.
Correct.
And so that's why I like it.
Yeah. So
Even though I hate it.
I really feel that people tend to be biased toward, or like new runners, people who don't have a coach, tend to be over, or like to bend towards heart rate because it feels sciencier. It feels more objective. It has sort of the veneer of accuracy on it. But if you actually look at the research, it's not backed up. Most of the research shows that RPE, or just like vibing it out and feeling how your body feels, is actually a more accurate way of assessing your output, because our bodies don't actually work in discrete systems, right? Like your body does not actually know, understand, or give a shit about what zone 3 is,
Well, yeah, and also it's using a combination of all those systems all the time when you're
Totally.
exercising.
Yeah, and so let's talk about heart rate, what it is, when it's useful, and why we typically don't recommend it for most people. So each person's heart rate zones are different, and you'll have to calibrate it using a Friel test or something similar. So something that I always want to steer people away from are like the runner's world style of very simple heart rate calculations, like the commonly used 220 beats per minute minus your age. That's just not a thing. Those are super inaccurate. So to determine your actual heart rate zones, you have to undergo laboratory testing or conduct a field test. You can find good resources for these, like the Joel Friel running or the heart rate field test or LTHR, lactate heart rate protocols. But again, these are also pretty imperfect, even though they might give the veneer of precision. If you don't execute your test correctly, it may not be that good. And if you have the resources to go in and do this in a library where they have you run on a treadmill and they put one of those crazy masks in your mouth, awesome. But
I
like,
would just rather you rest than do
yeah,
that.
I know.
My God.
Yeah. Again, like if
You ever done a
have,
VO2 max test?
I have not, and my life has been fine.
You're all right.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Like,
Just checking in.
Am I the best runner on earth? No, but like, am I doing pretty well without, having to run on a treadmill with a tube down my throat? Also, yes. So, again, like, it's really important to make sure that if you are trying to do heart rate training, that your zones are accurate. So using the ones that are preloaded into your watch, that's not going to work. Those are usually just based on like really, really basic sort of like age calculations.
Yeah.
And again, it might feel sciencey because it's on your wrist and it's like, oh, look, there's numbers and data and ooh, fancy, but it's not actually based on as much precision as you might think. So just sort of diving into how the 5-zone system, which is like sort of what I wouldn't say the gold standard, but like, because I feel like that commutes a level of credibility that most people actually don't imbue this system with. But most people function off a 5-zone scale.
Or a 3-zone. It depends. A lot of research is done with 3-zone.
Well, that's the other tough thing is that the majority of the research is done on a 3-zone. And then a lot of coaches and like colloquially, most people use a 5-zone.
Yeah, I prefer the 5-zone in my
Yeah, correct. Because I feel like it helps better sort of delineate between efforts. So zone 1 is very, very easy. Zone 2 is light or 57 to 63% of your max heart rate. And that's where you're really going to want to spend most of your time. Zone 3 is vigorous exercise or 64 to 76% of your max heart rate. Zone 4 is high, so 77 to 95% of your maximum heart rate. And zone 5 is the very tippity top, 96 to 100% of your max heart rate.
Oh, it's uncomfortable being up there.
Doesn't feel good. So one con of heart rate is again, like you need to have a test of using heart rate measurements is in addition to doing a test that again, you have to execute perfectly for it to be meaningful, you also need equipment. We have a lot of athletes that when they join Microcosm, they want to use their watch and don't do that. One time I actually strapped my my watch to my bike while I went on to the handlebar of my bike while I went on a bike ride, and it was measuring my bike's heart rate of being about 96 beats a minute. So again,
Wow.
These things are like it didn't even have the ability to assess I am not on a human wrist. It was like, fuck it, I'm going to spit out some numbers.
How did these watch
How did they get away with?
How do they find your heart rate? Because they're not actually measuring the beats.
They are not. So it's actually just a proxy of your heart rate. They're not measuring the beats like an ECG. It uses LED lights and light absorption or PPG. I'm not going to be able to pronounce this correctly. Photoplasmography.
You did great.
Photoplethysmography. So what it actually is measuring is changes in your blood volume as light is absorbed by the vessels. It's not actually counting your heartbeats So again, it's just a proxy and they feed it through an algorithm. So the accuracy is going to depend on, the company's proprietary algorithm, how good it is at measuring, light. And I think something that always blows my mind is a lot of these things aren't tested on melanated skin, so folks of color are totally left out of these algorithms and these measurement systems. So that's a big ol' red flag, just absolutely flapping in the breeze in terms of how credible is this technology. If it only works on a certain subset of the population,
Sweet, great.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. And again, I think the big issue here is that heart rate data, the numbers, the systems, it all seems way more sciencey than it actually is. The goal here is to actually measure and understand our effort, and there's a lot of things that can fuck up heart rate data. So things like sleep, your hydration status, how much caffeine you've had, and stress all impact your actual heart rate measurement.
Yeah.
And again, heart rate just isn't as perfect and accurate as it might seem. Our bodies don't operate on perfect zones. My body doesn't say like, oh, shoot, okay, let's switch into zone 2 now. Perfect, I'm hitting exactly this many beats per minute. Our bodies operate on multiple energy systems simultaneously, and getting things approximately right is oftentimes good enough, even for high-level athletes. And I think that a lot of times newer athletes fall victim to sort of the binary thinking that heart rate training often confers, and they think, oh, well, this run wasn't useful or it wasn't successful because I wasn't in my perfect zone. And it's sort of a way that data can derail the actual intent of the run.
Well, think about this. You described the percentage of max heart rate that many of these zones kind of equated to. And you said that 1 hour effort was 77 to 95% of your overall heart rate. That's a huge range.
It's a huge range.
So depending on how you feel, you're going to fall into that huge range. And if you judge your workout quality by always being at 95% of your max heart rate for threshold efforts, not only are you really narrowing your scope as to what is actually an effective workout and putting a lot of unnecessary pressure on yourself as an athlete to execute in a certain way every single time, but you're also putting yourself at serious risk for injury, because there's no way any athlete in the world can always hit the absolute peak of what they're capable of on every single workout. And it always reminds me of Kipchoge, because he says, I never exceed 90% of my capacity on any workout ever. Yeah. And I love that, because that's sustainability right there. That's a buffer against injury, against unnecessary impact forces.
Well, there's also a difference between 90% effort over the course of a workout than if you're doing strides, you need to be hitting more than 90% of your max heart. Those things are different, shouldn't be conflated. I want to make sure we're clear here.
Well, strides.
He doesn't say he never exceeds 90% of his maximum heart rate.
Of his maximum effort.
In terms of extrapolated over a workout, though.
But strides,
it's also very different.
Strides aren't long enough to exceed 90% of your effort. So maybe a VO2 max interval could be long enough to get you close to flirting with that. But
again,
a stride, never.
in a specific interval, I do want people, or in a stride, I do want them to push to go more than 90%.
Well, that's the point of the workout.
Correct. Right. But that's why I think it's important to delineate between, 90% effort for 90 minutes, not possible. But for 20 seconds, possible, right, to get there.
Sure, but the intention would be to be there.
Right. I just think it's different to say I don't exceed 90% effort, kind of more as a vibes-based measurement, versus I'd never, not even for a second, exceed 90% of my maximum heart rate in a workout.
I think that right, those are two different things.
Because again, we don't want you to go to the well, but there should be moments where you go really fucking hard, and then you should be fit enough that you're able to recover and proceed with the workout.
But if you think about it in the in the way that I was thinking about it, if your range is 77 to 95% and you want to go to 100% every time, that means hitting 95% of your heart rate on every single 1 hour effort or lactate threshold workout.
Well, definitely not on a lactate threshold workout, but I'm just thinking in terms of strides,
But that's
I'm
different.
sure right. I want to make sure that we're clear and we're not telling people to never exceed 90% effort.
If he was striding at 100% effort, he'd be, doing a 100-meter dash with terrible running form, and it wouldn't help his overall development.
But 99, 98, yeah.
Right, up to the point.
I'm sure that he does max effort.
Yeah, of course.
Intervals, even if the entire workout is not max effort.
I bet you he does very intense intervals, but
I also think that likely I train my athletes pretty radically different than Eliud Kipchoge.
I just think that it's important for athletes to realize that even the best in the world aren't going to the well in their workouts.
Correct. Yeah, I don't advise people go to the well. I do advise they go to maximum effort at key moments. And those things are different.
There's a difference there.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to delineate.
Okay, go on.
Again, and I think that, like, you know, even let's say hypothetically you execute the perfect like Friel test and you're able to perfectly calibrate your heart rate zones, your intensity levels are really a shifting goalpost. Again, our body doesn't work in discrete systems. Like, you know, especially women, our hormonal and our menstrual cycles will change like the actual effort and intensity that we experience at key moments in our training. So it's important to take that into account. And again, even if you perfectly execute a field test, depending on where you are in your training cycle, what your life stress is like, just what's going, like a million other variables might actually change how your body experiences that stimulus. And that's why I typically don't encourage athletes to use heart rate data. If I have an athlete that is really struggling with under recovery, or I feel like we're going too hard, or their life stress is significantly higher, or if they move from like sea level to altitude, I will do like a focused maybe 6-week training block to sort of with a heart rate monitor chest strap to help them recalibrate their effort levels. That is but it's usually to encourage people to slow down. But again, like our bodies don't work in discrete energy systems. Like I don't usually encourage people to walk hills to make sure that they stay in zone 1. Usually you're able to like, yeah, sure. Even if you leave a purely easy effort level to get up the hill, as long as you're able to return your heart rate to baseline, that's fine. And that's going to be a little bit better for building fitness long-term, given that you can still recover from the effort.
So let's shift gears to RPE to kind of give that contrast between this really finite way of looking at things through HR data. It's got to be this number at this time to hit this effort level. And let's kind of contrast that with this idea of rate of perceived exertion and this really like an analog method of measuring where you're at in your workouts.
And again, I think that we all have to undo the bias that more technology and more data is better. That is not seen in the evidence as being validated. Yes, RPE is a subjective measurement, but it's a really vital skill. Knowing how your body actually feels is a better proxy for effort than numbers that your watch is spitting out.
Let's just take an example of that, right? Like, so if you put out a certain effort to run your 6-mile easy loop around the block and it's completely flat, and that gives you a certain HR number, and then you go and try to replicate that same number on a hilly route on the trails, and you're going purely by heart rate, your heart rate is going to be fluctuating a lot more based on those hills. Your effort level is going to be climbing, then going down, climbing, then going down. And so if you're relying on just the number on your wrist, what's going to happen?
You're going to slow down when it would actually be more beneficial to sustain a consistent effort.
Yeah, totally. Or you're going to speed up.
And again, like, I think that it's really important. Like, we always want to coach athletes towards more independence, not dependence. And that includes on their coach and on technology. We want athletes to really understand how their body is feeling and how it's actually adapting to the effort and what the effort is. So RPE is a skill that every athlete should cultivate. And it helps foster a deeper understanding of and connection with the body. RPE is also a better way to understand how things like terrain, weather, stress, interact with our training. So just to sort of break down, so a lot of the research here uses the Borg scale, which is a scale that was developed by this Swedish exercise physiologist that I don't personally find as useful for athletes. So again, you're going to see
20.
Yeah,
up to 20.
Which, like, 20, are you kidding me?
That's just too much,
That's too
man.
many numbers,
oh
man.
My God. Even to 10, which is what
too
I
many.
use. Is
I think 5 is pretty easy to wrap our brains around.
Totally.
So zone 1 is the recovery run, and that should be 4 to 5. Or actually, this is out of 10. So, this is the scale of 10. The 5 zone is for heart rate. to be clear, I'm using a 1 to 10 scale right now. So recovery run is between 4 to 5 on the scale. It should be easy to speak, so totally conversational. Your breathing should be comfortable, barely above walking breathing rate. Don't worry about trying to only breathe through your nose. That's not really a thing. That's something we get a lot of questions about. But nasal breathing, not validated in the majority of evidence as being a performance enhancer.
Oh, let's not go down this rabbit hole today.
Oh my God.
What's zone 2 all about?
So endurance run, which is 5 to 6 on the scale. So you're going to have moderate breathing, not labored, but, like easily distinguishable from a walk. And again, it should be conversational. You're able to have a conversation with your friend, but you're maybe not able to, like, I don't know, recite the Constitution from memory. Then we have steady state run. So this is high end aerobic, and this is a 7 out of 10 on the scale. And that's when you have deep labored breathing and you can only speak in 2 to 3 sentences. So thinking of things like, holy shit, Coach TJ is such a hard ass. If you're able to say that, sounds like you're doing a steady state run. Then we have tempo run. This is when you're running above lactate threshold, and this is an 8 to 9 out of 10 on the scale. I always cue my athletes that it's comfortably hard, but hardly comfortable, and you kind of want to stop for most of the time, but you absolutely don't have to, is sort of where we're at. So here, your breathing should be deep and labored and definitely elevated from that of a steady state run. And you're only able to speak in 5 to 7 word sentences like, God damn it, Coach TJ would be sort of your tempo run speaking. Running intervals is 10 out of 10. So this is your VO2 max interval. Your breathing should be short and rapid. And here you can only use choice 4-letter Zoe words.
Yeah. I feel like this scale isn't quite as nuanced as the one that I prefer to use with my athletes, but this is a really great starting point.
My athletes.
Really good starting point.
Yeah. So, while you train, check in with yourself and assign an RPE to your effort.
Yeah.
And that's actually going to more accurately reflect how hard your body is working than heart rate. Use it to guide your training intensity based on how you feel on any given day. For example, let's say you had planned a zone 2 workout, but your RPE suggests you're getting sort of more into steady state. Consider easing off to maintain the desired intensity. Like, no matter what your watch or heart rate is saying, you know your body and you understand the effort better than any data or algorithm can. And learn your body's signals. Over time, you'll become more attuned to your body. You'll recognize the difference between a sustainable, moderate effort and the signs of overexertion. Your RPE can become a trusted advisor, helping you to adapt to varying conditions like challenging terrain, heat, weather, or even fatigue, how much caffeine, all these different things. And if you're really interested and you're still just like, I hear you guys, but I want to use heart rate, I like the data, consider therapy. That could be a thing for you if you still really feel like data is that important. But you can combine RPE with heart rate monitoring to help you really understand what the numbers mean in relation to how your body really feels. I really don't recommend using heart rate in isolation as if a thing is possible to totally tune out and disconnect from how your body feels. Remember, we're athletes. We know our bodies, and if we feel like we don't, that should really be a place of curiosity and challenge for us to get closer to understanding how things feel. And just because something seems really sciencey and seems backed by data doesn't always mean it is, or that it's necessarily the right choice for you. Anything else that you like to push athletes to think about when it comes down to heart rate versus RPE?
It's a good question. I think it is, again, just about recognizing and understanding that you are your own best heart rate monitor.
Yeah.
Like, you are built to understand your effort level out there. And if you invest in that, it will pay back in dividends for you as an athlete over time. Mm-hmm. I remember when I had a conversation with my coach a while back about race pacing. And, what on the, RPE scale should I, race at for X number of things? And he's like, I don't really know. I don't even race with a watch. And I was like, you don't race with a watch? How do you even, that's crazy. And I've actually noticed that the time I spend looking at my watch when I race is almost so minimal now to the point where I could probably race without one too.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you are willing to put in that work and to listen and to build the awareness, all of a sudden you become completely non-dependent on this technology, which in and of itself is fairly flawed because it relies on these
A lot of things.
technological like devices, the light and all of that really just isn't that accurate.
I feel like it's something that newer runners get suckered into because, again, it has the veneer of being really sciencey and it seems like a super fun, advanced system, but it's just not borne out in the majority of research as being as effective for moderating and understanding effort.
And like, you don't need to be so precise with your workouts.
Right. Like, there's a level of precision that just isn't how our bodies work. And so that's like my primary issue with heart rate is that our bodies they just don't operate on a scale of 1 to 5. They're complex, beautiful, living organisms. And like, to try to graft some like fake ass human generated scale isn't always productive for our goals.
Totally. And I think for, a lot of athletes, like this kind of like 4 to 10, RPE scale is just such a great way to start things. But even more, I like people to just remove the numbers from this.
Yeah.
Like, how does it feel and link it back to your breathing? Because
Right.
breath is the way inward. It's the way to understand how stressed you are, and training provokes stress. So the way we breathe and basically like how many sentences we can speak conversationally is the best proxy for understanding your effort. So like, I love I think this RPE scale is spot on. Like, what is a recovery effort? Easy to speak. Like, you can speak normally, like you would be able, and your breathing is like you would be able to breathe when you're walking. So that's like super, super easy.
And I'll link to this in the
easy.
show notes, but I wrote a really fun blog post for Microcosm a couple years back called A Not So Serious Guide to Effort that gives you songs that can help you understand the efforts.
Right. Like, what is your easy run pace?
It's Pony by Genuine.
Is that a conversational effort?
That's my recovery run effort is Pony by Genuine, and it should feel sexy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I do think that there's, for higher end athletes who are a little bit more experienced, this 4 to 5 and 5 to 6, you're going to be able to start to actually delineate between what is a 5 and a 6 out of 10. And those are actually different efforts. And I love the nuance there as you get to know yourself, like, what is 8 out of 10 versus 9 out of 10, it's a real difference between, like a 1 hour effort run and a 10K pace or a 5K pace, even as you get closer to 10 out of 10. So, there's so much that you can explore in using this scale and how much you can get to know yourself as an athlete and what you're capable of and where some of those kind of limits are too. That's the whole point of this. And then in the end, it's going to really serve you in understanding how to actually gauge your effort level in relationship to your training. And then your training is going to become higher quality, and then you're going to get more out of the process over a longer time period.
Yeah. You're the boss of you, not your watch.
Well, thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. As usual, hit us up, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com, microcosm-coaching.com. If you've got questions, you want us to cover anything in a future call, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Let us know what your pee looks like after drinking beet juice.
Scary. Scary
It's
what it
very
looks
scary.
like.